The past week marked one of the most sacred times in the Christian calendar, Holy Week, a time for reflection, sacrifice, and ultimately resurrection. But as our nation wrestles with growing uncertainty, rising crime, mental health struggles, and the disconnection of our youth, we're left asking, has the true meaning of Easter been lost in the noise? Welcome to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Tonight we sit down with Father Ferguson, the Rector of Holy Cross Parish, to talk about the state of the nation, the role of the church in community healing, and whether faith still holds the power to reach the hearts of Bahamians today. This is On the Record, and our discussion begins on the other side of this break. And we're back. Father Ferguson joins us now as we begin by examining the role of the modern-day church in Bahamian society. Father, welcome to the show. It's good to have you with us.
Good to be here, Jerome. Thank you for having me.
All right, so I really would like to begin by us sort of tackling the current spiritual state of the nation. I mean, even prior to coming into this space, we talked about how our society is evolving, how the traditions of the church even seem to be under threat in many ways, because, you know, we're evolving as a people. But if you could sort of give us a view of the spiritual state of the Bahamas today.
I think to begin with, we are suffering from what many societies and countries around the world are suffering from, and that is the plight of secularism. We are living in a postmodern era. We are living in a place where the role of religion or spirituality perhaps is dimming, and there is this move towards intellectualism. There is this move towards science. There's this move towards a sense of logic that overrides these quote-unquote superstitions of the past. And with more of our people studying overseas and being in these very secular societies and contexts, of course, when they return home, it is a hard sell for this religious framework of a nation that we have, and so we find that there's a pull away from that. And then, of course, the next dimension to that is that the parents of today are less strict about church and about religious affiliations and that kind of thing. That is a particular challenge today. So, for example, in years gone by, going to church was not optional.
Oh no. Even as an adult.
Exactly.
Even coming over from college, I'm just
exactly.
like, no, I's a grown man, but you got to go to church.
I still got to go. Yeah, so those things were not optional. Being a part of a faith community was not optional. Being a part of service organizations through the church were not optional. These were ways that our parents and foreparents thought that it would build character in us. God would wash over us. We would be better people. And they were right, because we're looking at a country today where the younger demographic of the country is particularly a growing unchurched demographic. They do not have that relationship with the church or with any spiritual community. And because of that, we find that there is not an appreciation, there is a lack of respect, traditions are dying, and we are not the better for it.
How much of that, though, can you blame on the church itself? Because you will hear many people say, well, I don't go to church because, and they will give a litany of reasons,
of course,
as to why, whether it's the priest, the people in the church, things that are happening within the church. How much of that really rests at the feet of the church itself as an institution?
Well, I think that we have to just begin from a place of honesty. There are always things the church can do better. Let's just be honest. There are always ways for us to improve. There are always more ministry areas that we can delve into, that we can tighten up on. There's more outreach we can be engaged in. But I still do believe that the church's role in our society is unsung. I think that the church has done a tremendous task, a tremendous job. If we just look at education, that before the government of the Bahamas, of course, years ago after slavery, the abolition of slavery and all that era, before the government made a decision to educate slaves and people of color, the church took that on. And church day schools were started to educate persons, to socialize people, to bring people along the journey towards, being independent and understanding who they are and their value and their worth. So, yes, there are always things that the church can do better. But I think that we as a people, as families, as individuals, have to begin taking responsibility for our rejection of the church, or our rejection of the religious influence that is present in our country. And I think that people will come with the litany of excuses and the litany of reasons, and I do not negate that there are legitimate church hurt experiences.
I like that term, church hurt experience, and that's the truth.
There are those legitimate reasons, but at the same time, people go to their jobs every day with people they don't like, and they go to their jobs every day with people that they don't get along with, and where there are hurtful experiences as well. And but because they find that gratifying in the long run or in the short term, they still participate. So I think that we have to take responsibility for our actions and what we engage in.
Do you think there is still a place for the church in national affairs?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think so. The church has always operated as a kind of moral compass for our society. And I think in an era in which the morality of our nation is at great risk, it is more important now than ever that there is that prophetic role of the church still happening, the role of the church in the sense of being able to, and we're not talking about, damning and sending people to hell. We're not talking about this, the fire and brimstone kind of thing, but we're talking about having a conversation with the nation about who we want to be and what kind of people we are.
But is that missing?
I think it is. Let
me back up and let me tell you why I asked that.
Yeah.
Let me tell you why I asked that. Yeah. Because you just said something to me. You just said something that made me think. It's not the you're going to hell and the damnation, but that is what people hear.
Of course.
That is what people cling to, and so that's why I asked. Are these conversations happening on a national level beyond just if you do this thing you are going to burn in hell, or you do this thing it's sinful, but beyond that, are those types of conversations happening?
I don't feel that those conversations are happening enough. Okay. If we look at the Jesus model, Jesus rarely, unless he was dealing with the Pharisees and the Sadducees of his day, where he just needed to hit them where it hurt the most, for the point of transformation. Jesus, when he met people in sin, he stopped and had a conversation with them. When he met people who were in a state of vulnerability, he stopped and had conversations with them, and he helped to draw them into who he was, which drew them out of where they were. And I think that we
drew them in with love.
Correct. Okay. And I do not think that we have capitalized on that Jesus model enough. I think that we have been such a beat 'em with the Bible kind of culture, church culture that we don't have an appreciation with how strong and how powerful love is.
And do you think, though, that has contributed to this disconnect that people have with the church itself, even the young people?
Absolutely.
Because there is so much condemnation and damnation for the things that they are doing as young people, that there is no interest in coming into the church to hear about Jesus or the Bible or salvation. They're just not interested because they have been beat over the head with the Bible and teachings of the Bible for so long.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely a part of the challenge, and a part of that is the fact that, you know, church has become a place of judgment in some instances. It's a place
You're
where
about to preach.
you know, I don't want to get in too much trouble.
No, I got you. Let's go with it.
But it has become a place of judgment and a place where we just beat up on people. And it's not a solace, it's not a place of solace, a place of refuge, a place of healing and wholeness. And I think that people, whether they can verbalize that or not, that's their experience. And that's why there is this sense of animosity towards the church, this rejection of any kind of formal religious experience, and people say, well, you know, I will go to God for myself, or I will experience God on my own terms, because that way of experiencing God for them has been harmful and hurtful to who they are as people. And I'm not talking about condoning sin or you know, kind of fraternizing with persons on that level. I'm just talking about being able to communicate the gospel in a way where it does what it needs to do, where we don't hurt people in the process, and where we are able to bring people into the fold and help them to understand that in spite of their vulnerabilities and their weaknesses and their issues and their problems, like we all have, God still loves us.
One of the things that you said, it really stuck out to me, that the work of the church is many times unsung.
Of course.
Which brings me to this next question. Are churches really doing enough to support those vulnerable and those vulnerable communities, the vulnerable among us and the vulnerable communities? And I ask it because I know in my own context, I know the work that my church does, but no one talks about it.
Correct. And again, the church is one of the unsung heroes of our nation. And I say that because the role of the church is to do, not to publicize its doing. And the church has always done that. The church has always been on the margins of society, caring for those who cannot care for themselves. We have an age of social media and information, whereas if you don't publicize it, it means you're not doing it. And that is misinformation. That is not the truth, because our role and our goal is not to sound the trumpet ahead of us. Our role and our goal is to get the work done. And whether we are given the accolades or the thank yous come in our direction for doing it, that's the goal, and that's what many of our churches do. The big churches, the smaller churches. I just talking with colleagues, the amount of help that is given on a weekly basis to people is insurmountable. And many of us as clergy, as ministers, we even go without in order to assist persons in our communities.
But the challenge sometimes that people have with the church as an organization, and not any particular denomination, is the physical representation sometimes that they see coming out of these churches, these very large edifices, and the pastor driving this car or doing this, and people are saying, well, yeah, your kingdom is on earth. Meanwhile, you know, the people down the road, you know, the roof is caving in. And so that is the contradiction for a lot of people.
It is a contradiction. Bear in mind, you know, those instances are fewer than what the normal regime looks like, what the normal analysis looks like. So in normal circumstances, that is not the case. You have mega churches, mega ministries. You have persons who are exploiting the gospel. And I'm not saying that all those persons with mega churches are doing that. I'm just saying that there are those who are exploiting the gospel and making good use of their opportunities. And then in the majority of cases, I beg to differ that is not the case. In the majority of cases, there are ministers, pastors, clergy who are living at their means, and they are doing their best, and they are doing their best to take care of their families and their communities, and they are not living lavish lifestyles. And they are some of the heroes that we celebrate. But of course, those persons who are doing those kinds of things, they will get the media presence, and they will get
the spotlight.
They
and
get
those
the
are the
spotlight.
people, those individuals are the ones that people defer to when they talk about what the church is not doing or things that they are doing.
Of course,
if you did not have the church doing what it is doing, whether it is helping the vulnerable, whether it's even providing that spiritual guidance, how bad off would we be?
Oh boy, we think we're at a deficit now. I think we would be at a tremendous loss, because again, the church's role in terms of family life, what the church does in terms of marriages and bringing families together, in terms of bringing the various demographics of society together. What the church does in terms of outreach, what the church does in terms of education, what the church does through its service organizations and various ministries to young people, to the elderly, to the vulnerable, is insurmountable. There's no doubt that the government cannot do it on its own. And before the government did it officially, the church always did it. Mm-hmm. And so while the government ought to be applauded for what it is able to do, it does not take anything away from the church for what it is doing.
And let's be honest, sometimes when the government is doing politics centers, which is very different from a church.
Absolutely. And it's unfortunate that
It's
governments
the reality.
do that.
It's not aimed at any one government,
no.
but it is systemic.
It is.
But in the case of a church, by and large, that filter is not there.
Yeah, the motivation is clear.
Yeah.
The motivation is to be like Jesus. The motivation is to do what Jesus did. That is to care for the least, the lost, and the lowest. The motivation is to go out and take the gospel everywhere and to help people to come into their true selves.
We all are drawn to different denominations for whatever reason. Yeah. But is there enough collaboration with the various denominations within the various communities? Do churches really talk to each other and work together for the needs of various communities?
That's
the kind of question, of course, you want to leave, right? we had a joke about what kind of questions can get him to leave.
No, I would leave. Actually, it's a very good question.
Yeah.
Because we are, and the word there is ecumenism, and it has to do with the coming together of various faith traditions, and focusing on what unites us as opposed to what makes us separate or apart. We do not focus on what unites us enough. In our communities, our churches do not do enough collaboration. In fact, it almost seems as if there is a competition sometimes, and I hate to say that, and I may get some bite back for it, but I'm okay.
You can blame me. You could say I asked the question.
I will absolutely blame you. But I think that sometimes people are competing to showcase who they are, what they have, or what they do, as opposed to coming together and saying, this is our community, our churches are in this community. How can we better serve this community? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? How can I supplement what you are doing? Up to September, I was working in the U.S. at a small church in Alabama. And one of the wonderful things that it does, we had a food pantry that we did every week. Every Wednesday, we fed close to 200 families. And what happened is that there were other churches in the community that did not do that. But guess what they did? They sent in checks to help facilitate, augment, supplement our budget for feeding persons in the community. And I thought that was it's something I met in place happening, but I thought it was such a noble enterprise. It was such a Christian thing to do.
Yeah.
Not to try and say, well, since they have a food pantry, let's have a bigger
Let's try
one.
to ours, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But say, you're already doing it, you're doing it well. How can we help you to do it better?
So in some cases, there's almost a level of tribalism.
Absolutely. And it goes against the high priestly prayer of Christ when he prays for his disciples, may they be one as the Father and I are one. There is a oneness that the body of Christ, that Christians have to experience, even if we don't agree on everything. It's okay, but there's a oneness and a sense of unity that
I
we
want
must
to
have.
challenge you even further on this question of even coming together with interdenominational faiths. Growing up, all I knew was the Christian church.
Yeah.
Now I see the proliferation and growth of Muslims.
Yes.
I see the proliferation and growth of Buddhism.
Yes.
I see many other faith-based religions in our society.
Of course.
How challenging is that for the Christian church when these are... They're in our families, in our homes. They work with us.
Of course.
And I don't mean in a disparaging way,
No.
There are people who share different beliefs.
Yes.
And how do we even embrace that, or do we embrace that for the better good of mankind?
Again, this is unpopular, but this is not a Christian empire. I think that when persons mount pulpits and when platforms are given to some of us, we treat the Bahamas as if it's an imperial Christian state. And that, I think that's a mistake. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, you ought to have the leeway or the independence to worship in the way that you choose. Once, of course, there's no violation against general state laws, and I say that very carefully. But the truth is that we have had Buddhists among us for a long time. We have had the Muslim faith among us for a long time, the Baha'i faith among us for a long time, Rastafarianism among us for a long time. And we have almost pushed these other expressions to the side because we feel, for whatever reason, threatened by the spirituality of other faiths. And I don't think that is healthy for us. I don't think that it is helpful to us, because many of these faiths, Abrahamic faiths and those that are more recent, many of them still espouse some of the same ideals as the Christian faith. The ideal of love, the ideal of forgiveness, the ideal of helping one another, the ideal of doing unto others, the golden rule that exists in other faiths, doing unto others as you would have them to do unto you. And we cannot discard and mistreat persons because, they don't belong to our church.
But what's interesting is, in the Anglican faith, in our intercessionary prayers, we pray for those who do not share the same faith as us.
Absolutely.
And every time I come to that,
Absolutely.
I wonder whether people really pay attention to what is being said at that particular point, because it is calling on us to really be open and willing to those who don't share the same faith. But many of us are very opposed and closed-minded and want have nothing to do with.
Very. And it doesn't mean that you have to believe what they believe.
Sure. Do you think that's what people are afraid of?
Yeah, that's, when we don't know better, sometimes the lack of exposure and us just being closed-minded, like you said, insular in our thinking is not helpful to us. And the truth is that I think there's so much that we can learn from each other. And I think that if we come together on perhaps social issues, on issues that are happening in our communities, I think there's such a stronger voice we would have as faith communities representing the Bahamas than just a singular church.
At that point, we are going to take a break. It's a good point for us to end on. But when we come back, we're going to take a deeper look at the crisis among our youth. Also, one of the most sacred periods within the church, Holy Week. All that and more coming up when On the Record continues. Welcome back. In this segment, we focus on some of the most vulnerable among us, our young people. As suicide rates climb and churches report dwindling youth attendance, how do we reconnect this generation with our faith? Father, I particularly, you see young people in church, in our space, in the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church. You see the young, you see the acolytes, you see the folk, the young people serving on the altar, participating, and then they hit the teenager stage and they disappear. We don't see that same level of, and it's almost like, okay, well, because you're at this age and you almost have to come or whatever, you find them there. But once they hit, early adulthood, something happens. What, from your perspective, is driving young people, young adults, away from church?
I think that we are missing a demographic for a number of reasons. I think part and parcel, we are living in a different time. This was not when Jerome grew up, or persons older than yourself. Whereas there was this allegiance to the system and to the order of worship and church and that church community. And I think that there are so many things vying for our adolescent attention.
Let's call it what they are. Distractions.
Exactly.
Distractions.
There's so many things, and good and bad distractions. Some distractions are good because I found that a lot of young people are engaged in so many clubs and other service organizations that church seems optional now. But there are those bad distractions, social media. And of course, the party culture that has become that subculture of the Bahamas.
Everybody
that has become
brunch
that has become
Sunday.
the culture. Of course,
people go to brunch on Sundays.
People go to brunch on Sundays. People play golf on Sundays. So there are so many dynamics.
They do all kinds of other things.
There are so many dynamics, and so you find that you are missing a demographic. And I think that the church has to pivot, and the Roman Catholics have been very good at this in the past. I'm not sure how it's still going, but they started doing Saturday evening masses and that kind of thing to
I tell you a joke, but
to kind of get those who...
My neighbor was Catholic when we were growing up, and I used to go to Saturday mass with her, so we could go out, and I didn't have to go to church Sunday. Until my mother called on.
Dying to work.
But you're right. It was a way to be able to attend church.
Still engage. To still engage. So that's something that happened, and then, of course, early morning services, late afternoon services, evening services, just diversifying the time span. Because, the truth is that we do live in a culture where the Bahamas is open for business on Sundays.
People work on Sundays.
And people work on Sundays. So what are we doing during the week? What are we doing on off days so that we help to supplement the dynamics of that? So that's a part of the challenge. But I think the major challenge is what can be seen as the church's relevance to my life as a young person, as a millennial, as a Generation Z person. What relevance is the church? Father or the pastor or the minister is getting up and saying these things, but how does that materialize in my well-being, in the expansion of my knowledge? How does it materialize in the transformation of my own life? And I think that some younger people, we like to see, we like to feel, we like to experience. And sometimes church can seem a bit otherworldly. And there's a dimension of that it should be that way. It's a different world, it's a different experience. You're communing with the divine. But at the same time, that communion with the divine ought to translate into something that is tangible in our own lives. And I think the long and short of it is that people have not experienced that authenticity. They've not experienced that level of transformation. They have not seen the fruit in their own lives. And so they see it as a dead zone in some instances.
And those who will oppose that will say, well, it would seem as if the church is compromising in many ways, and compromising the principles and the godly principles and the teachings. Do you get a pushback from time to time with people who will say that to you.
Of course. I'm not, my compromise has nothing to do with principles. My compromise has to do with the utility of it. You know, how do we reach the masses, men and women of every birth? For an answer, Jesus gives the key. And the key is, if I be lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men unto me. But how do we do this? And this is the beauty of the gospel narrative, the text. Matthew says, go into all the world and preach the gospel and teach them all that I have commanded you, baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But what it doesn't tell you is how to do this. Because in the wisdom of Jesus, in the wisdom of God, he knew that from age to age, as time lapses and as time spans, you will have to employ creative mechanisms by which to engage your constituency. And so I think that we have not been as creative as we can be. We have been a bit too guarded with what we have always known it to be. And we are unwilling to launch out into the deep, into the unfamiliar water, and to just see if this will engage people at a higher level.
What do young people tell you are some of the reasons that they're losing faith, or they are moving away from church? What are some of the reasons that you hear? They would say to you, well, you know, Father, I'm interested because, or, you know, I'm no longer a believer because.
Yeah. I think a big thing for young people is a lack of authenticity. I think it's a big thing. And, you know,
I mean, from the church or from the individuals in the church?
From individuals in the church.
Okay.
You know, there is this mistrust of systems and institutions. There's that general mistrust. Mm-hmm. That's already the strike against us. Mm-hmm. But then when you come into the church and you experience persons who are one way in church
on Sunday. Sunday Christians
and another way outside of the church, sure, that incongruence is very difficult for people to navigate. That is very hard. So I think that's a major thing, because, you know, young people are very big on being, you know, authentic, being themselves, being real, keeping it real, that kind of lingo. And for them to see persons seemingly pretending is a challenge. And in some instances, people are not always pretending. I think that people show up as their best selves, and then humanity kicks in, and we are who we are. You do your best. Yeah, we do our best. But I don't think that we share the other side of that enough. I think that we often parade the pretense that, you know, we have it all together, we're doing well, we are moral agents, we are this, we are that, as opposed to saying, hey, the flip side of this is that I am still struggling elsewhere.
Has the church over the years, though, really deified its leaders and even those who call themselves Christians? And I'll say why. I'll ask you, this is my reason why. I will hear people say, but he is a Christian, or she's a Christian, and that's how they behave it, or that's the way the priest behaving, or that's the way the pastor behaving. And in the back of my mind, I'm going, yeah, but they're still human.
Of course.
You know, so have we sort of set up ourselves for this crisis that we find ourselves in where people are conflicted based upon what you say you are, or the position you hold in the church, versus you just being human and being flawed?
Yeah, absolutely. We have set up ourselves, and I think Paul says it best. He says, follow me as I follow Christ. And I love that clause he puts in there. He says, follow me as I follow Christ, meaning that everything I do, it may not be in alignment, but where you see the good, follow the good. And Paul, he represents in his letters some of his own struggles of his humanity. You know, so he says, the very thing I want to do, I'm not doing. And the very thing I try not to do, I find myself doing. Oh, wretched man that I am. So there is this dichotomy. There is this struggle that each of us face as human beings. And I think that we have to here's the thing, keeping the focus on Christ, keeping the focus on God. We sometimes, because we have such larger than life spiritual leaders and such they are so charismatic,
we
and they
think
are
they're infallible.
Exactly. We deify them, and we put them on this pedestal that oftentimes leads to our own disappointment. And I think that we have to shift the focus, keep the focus on God. Remember that these persons are struggling like we are. They are going through life is lifing for them, just like it is lifing for us. And we have to operate with a sense of grace.
Do you think, though, that people are not necessarily always coming for the message, but coming for the man or the woman in the pulpit, as opposed to the message?
Yeah, I think that we can't fool ourselves that personality has a big role to play. It's sociology. It's who we are. We gravitate to more charismatic person. I don't mean charismatic in the religious sense. I mean just persons with a sense of charisma and a personality that draws people in.
Draws people in.
And I think that we can't negate that persons who can pull themselves together better and can manage the resources of their gifts better will have more of an attractive appeal. That's just life.
It's true. Sometimes I go to church and depending on the preacher, I say,
you should not say that.
Now everybody in church can look at me sideways, but it's true. It is human nature.
It is human nature. But spiritual maturity dictates that regardless of where the message is coming from, the focus is the message and not the messenger.
One of the things that I referenced in the opening was this issue of mental health.
Yeah.
Are churches and church leaders equipped to deal with this mental health issue effectively? I have a lot of opinions, but I'm gonna let you talk.
This is unpopular. We have done a disservice to the mental health crisis in our country. And it is as a result that partially that some of our people are not literate as it relates to mental health, the mental health phenomenon. We have over-spiritualized mental health and well-being, and we have relegated everything to being a demon of this or a spirit of that.
It's the devil.
It's the devil. And the truth is, I was having a conversation very, very recently, and it was not a serious conversation, but the person was just sharing, that this person, they go and come, like we say in our culture. And I just simply dropped the statement that that person has a mental health challenge. And I saw when the lights went on, they were like, "You're right, Father. Like, I never thought of it that way." And I think that we have functioned in such a dysfunctional way for so long in the church and in society. We have demonized mental health. We've demonized people with certain disorders and anxiety and depressive demeanors. We've demonized that for so long that we have not given way for persons to get the help that they need.
You'll hear people say things like, so-and-so depressed, or they just need to pray, or you just need to find God.
Yeah.
And these people are dealing with real mental health issues. And then in some instances, you have the heads of these churches who are counseling people and are not qualified to do so.
They're not. Let me correct that. Many of us are not qualified. So, for example, and I was just speaking with a mental health professional very recently. Our goal, our role as the church, when persons come to us, of course we offer counseling. Of course we offer intervention to some level. But I think that we have to come to a place where we realize that this is deep water. When we recognize mental health issues and challenges and certain mental instabilities, that we have to come to a place where we say that this is above our pay grade. We need to go to the professionals. We need to recommend people. We need to hand them over to persons where they can get help. And our pastoral care does not stop there, because we are still a part of that process, because we are still a spiritual voice in the mind of those persons, in the ear of those persons. So we continue to provide spiritual insights. But at the same time, I think that we have to draw the line of where we are capable and where we have to turn to the professionals. Yeah.
great advice, and that worries me many times, because I think that people sometimes will do themselves harm.
Absolutely.
Because they have not gotten the help, or they have found themselves in a place where someone has said, well, you need to pray about it, you need to do these things. It just does not work.
And some of the brothers and sisters in the clergy are very well-meaning.
Yeah.
They don't mean harm, but again, some of us are not literate as it relates to mental health. And I advise my brothers and sisters to get some training, do a course, do some reading, and to just familiarize yourself, so that when you encounter persons who have these challenges, you are able to navigate that in a way that benefits them and does not bring them more harm.
Being able to navigate.
Yeah.
We have, into the Easter season now, having just come through Holy Week. One of the discussions that we had even prior to the show is how Holy Week has changed, how it evolved. I remember when we went on break, when I was in St. Anne's for Holy Week, it was like that was a real solemn time and solemn period. Indeed. I don't see that anymore outside of the observances within the church itself.
Yeah. It's of course, as we said at the beginning of the show, it has to do with our movement towards secularism and our movement away from the religious experience and God in our culture. And the truth is that things have changed. So, last week, Holy Week, you would have seen parties and fetes and events and concerts and all these things happening. With no sensitivity towards the reason for the season.
Is it the same struggle with Christmas as with Easter?
Absolutely.
Because Christmas is Santa Claus and the gifts and the parties, and Easter has become the beach parties and the parties and the Easter baskets and the Easter bunny.
Absolutely. It has been tremendously commercialized. One, the culture has taken it over as just another holiday, without recognizing that holiday was really a holy day. So you would note, if you look at the holidays, you would note that before or after every major Christian festival, there is a holiday. The reason for that was that these, in a Christian culture, these festivals were of such great significance that people could not work. They could not be engaged in their normal routine of life. So there was a day to allow them either to rest or to celebrate the festival with the pomp and pageantry and the great significance that it deserves. But of course, we have reinterpreted holy days and made them holidays, and it's just another day not to go to work, and we do whatever we want without appreciating what is taking place.
As Father said to us, Good Friday is a holiday for you to come to church.
Yes, sir. I agree with Father. I agree with Father.
But again, it has become, very, very commercial in many ways. Just as we sort of wind down, I want to talk a little bit more too about the church and the family structure and the struggle sometimes to keep a family together in the church and to bring a family, to come to worship as a family in church, which again is something I don't see a lot of. I notice a young couple when they first get married, they come to church all the time. Then the children enter, then the wife comes with the children, the husband don't come, and then all of a sudden the children start coming by themselves. Whereas that was something that, growing up for me, for my Generation X and even those before me, we didn't see that. You always came to church as a family.
As a family, we the dynamics have changed. Society has changed. People have changed, and the demands of work and life have become so much greater, and we have placed the burdens of work and life on ourselves because there's this greater anxiety to accomplish this, that, or the next, to have the 3-4 bedroom home, to drive to drive the fanciest car.
Pastor Morrison once said to be tingsy.
Of course, that sounds like him. To drive, to date cars and to send our children to the best private schools. And all of these are noble enterprises, but I think that sometimes we allow them to rule us than us ruling them. So they become the source and summit of our lives, as opposed to God becoming that source and summit. And so when Jesus says you cannot serve God and wealth or God and mammon, that is what he's talking about. There's a divided allegiance. Yeah. And so because of that, we break down, we are exhausted. We live in a tired culture. Yeah. So we work so hard during the week that when we have the Sunday to rest, it's almost as if we are doing ourselves an injustice by getting up.
Some Sundays I be like, Lord. I know the mind is willing, but the body is like, and you're right, because we work so hard, we do so much.
We do too much. We are oversubscribed, and it's bad stewardship on our level. Mm-hmm. It's bad stewardship on our end, and I think that we just need to cut down to size what we can handle. And not only will it remove the stress away from our lives, it will give us a better rest, a better sense of well-being. And we will be able to show up as our best selves when we go to work and when we go to church and when we are committed to the various organizations and groups that we need to be committed to.
We've got just a few more moments here in the segment and in the show. What do you want folks to really walk away from this conversation today? You've given us a lot to think about. Yeah. This is your opportunity now to give some ministry. But what do you want people to really want? People who are really struggling with their church life, with their religion, with their spirituality, with so many other things. There's so many other things on their plates. We are not a people who do not know God. We are not a people who do not know religion. Mm-hmm. But we struggle.
Yeah. I want to say that, that struggle is a part of everyday life. And the only time you're not struggling in some way, shape, or form is if you are dead. And I think the harm of this prosperity gospel mechanism that has infiltrated the church is that, everything will be beautiful and everything will be fine. And there is that dimension of the faith and that dimension of the gospel and that hope, yes. But that God has come in Christ to make all of us rich and to make all of us, on top of everything, I think negates the fact that Jesus himself suffered. Look at last week, Holy Week and Good Friday, and what Jesus went through for us. He was wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. He went through torment and torture and unseen horrors at our expense so that we can have life and have it more abundantly. But that does not mean that life divorced of pain and of struggle, of issues, of challenges. And I think that what we have to do is we have to begin navigating these challenges as best we can, biting off only what we can chew. Like, there are some things we just cannot do. There are some things we have no control over. We need to divide the pie and see where we don't have control over, and we must commit that to God. And that's a part of our faith, going back to the core of faith, committing those things that we cannot do on our own over to God. And the things that God has given us leverage over, to do our best stewardship in how we navigate that, in how we rest, in how we work, in how we play, in how we discipline our children, and how we bring our families together, and how we forgive, and how we let go of the hurt and the pain. I think that these things, I'm preaching yet? Sound a little bit.
Come on now.
So how we navigate these things, and I believe that if we are able to get a handle on these challenges in our lives. I know a lot of people are going through a whole lot of economic instability, financial challenges, and many of us are just living beyond our means. We just can't afford some of the things that we want to do.
You are so right.
And so we need to cut out the fast food. I almost call one of them, but I don't want to get in trouble. We need to cut out the fast food every day. We need to cut out certain activities that are just draining us financially. And we need to just reel it all in. And if we're able to just do these things, it will help to rekindle the hope. we will gain better control of our lives and of our future, and we can commit to God in the way that we ought to. So that's my challenge for us. You know, this season of Easter, coming out of last week, Holy Week, is really an opportunity for us to recommit to God, for us to say yes to Jesus again. And that's the challenge of everyday life, getting up and saying yes to God. How can we live better? How can we be better? How can we help one another?
Father, you know, we used to go to church on Sunday to get that message, but you certainly have brought us a Thursday night message.
Amen.
I think a lot of times that's what's missing in the lives of people. Yeah. Just getting a word to help us to get through every day, through that week, through that period, through that difficult time. And so I think you've hit the nail on the head in so many ways. So thank you very much for coming in and sharing with us tonight in this forum. And these are certainly, you know, a lot of what you said, I think, helps to put a lot of things into perspective for us. So thank you very much, and all the best to you and the folks there at Holy Cross who you continue to lead. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerome.
All right. Well, a heartfelt thank you to Father Ethan Ferguson for joining us tonight and offering his insight and compassion. In a time when many feel lost, may seasons like these remind us of the power of reflection, restoration, and community. Thank you for watching On the Record. From all of us here, we wish you a safe and blessed evening.